Okay, so basically we start with a short introduction that will be given by me, and then we will move down on this agenda one by one, presenting different aspects of the project. So I will now switch to this introductory slide set. So you will see it in a moment when I learn how to do this, and then I will share another screen. Okay. That's a bit cumbersome. Okay, let's see. There. And here. Okay, now it's coming. So basically, eMERGE stands for Evaluation, Control and Mitigation of Environmental Impacts of Shipping Emissions. So we are a fairly large group of partners. We are all around Europe. So we are 18 together. So basically half of the 18 are universities. We have 6 research institutes, 2 companies, and 1 international organization. And that is HELCOM in the Baltic Sea area. So eMERGE is coming to a close in about 1 week's time. So the end of May will be our final day. And now it is a very good time to concentrate on the results. And the kind of an underlying idea of the whole project is that we are looking at environmental impacts of shipping, and we consider both the air and the water together. And this is something that is fairly unique, that has not been done before in this scale. So it is very exciting to speak about our findings. Okay. So basically, in the past, you may have seen that there have been some impact studies. For example, if you are changing environmental policy concerning shipping. So for example, if you're establishing a new emission control area, then through modeling, you can have an idea that, okay, for example, how large the change will be, for example, on atmospheric concentrations of air pollutants or human health effects. So these kind of things have been done in the past. However, there are some pitfalls which might come as a surprise. So, for example, in the past, the regulations for anti-fouling paints, they have changed. So TBT was banned, and then it was replaced by copper and zinc compounds. So it is still an organometallic compound that is used to ward off biological growth on ships' hulls. Now, even if we get rid of tin, we have a lot of copper now. So that may become a problem at some point. On the air side also, we have introduced NOx and SOx reductions through changes in MARPOL Annex 6. And some of the compliance options have been switching to LNG. So that creates a problem for increased greenhouse gas emissions through methane slip. And also as a side effect for NOx abatement, or in the future, if there is large adoption of ammonia as a fuel, then there is a potential problem with nitrous oxide and ammonia emissions. But for scrubbers, it's a little bit a different thing, because it is an attempt to curb air pollution, but it has the unfortunate consequence that it creates a new water pollution problem. So basically, this is what eMERGE aims for, understanding that how big is this problem and how harmful it is to the environment. And the way we are looking at this is that there are several steps involved. So with this pentagon, this is an indication that of the framework. So how do we do the impact assessments? So we are looking at shipping activities, we are modeling emissions and discharges from ships. And then we are looking how they transport and transform in the atmosphere and in the ocean. and then trying to, through laboratory experiments, understand, for example, the ecotoxicological or biological effects and looking at the impacts. And once we have identified those, then it is time to think about our response. So if something needs to be changed. And this is where the change of rules or regulations come to play. And then this cycle starts all over again. So this is the one way of doing these impact assessments. And you can imagine that it takes a lot of talent and large group of expertise to do all of this. So it has to do with engineering or natural sciences, and it has to do with biology and medical expertise, also economic experts and psychology. So all kinds of things are required to do this. So looking at ships, so there is something that goes from ships to the air and something that goes from ships to the water. So the different arrows here, so those are examples of different kinds of pollution streams from ships to the environment. So ones that go through the air, so those are the usual air pollutants. So you have small particles, you have SOx, you have NOx, these kind of things. So some of those will also deposit on the sea areas. So that's one way of introducing these pollutants to the marine environment. The other way is the direct discharge. So for example, looking at scrubbers, they have this effluent release to the sea, but that's not the only pollutant stream. So for example, you may have antifouling paint leaching, or you may have sewage releases and these kind of things. And there is a lot of regulation behind all this. So considerations for MARPOL and its 6 annexes. So it has to do with ballast water management convention. Also anti-fouling convention rules need to be followed, as well as EU sulfur directive. And then on top of all of this, there may be additional national rules. So you can see from the right that this is an example map of annual emissions of sulfur oxides from ships in the EU region. So these kind of things go to the atmospheric and then to water models. So it's a basic input from our emission model. Of course, we had faced some challenges when we started. Well, COVID was the evident one. So that postponed everything by a year. We have done our best to get the delays back as much as possible, but some revision of the timeline had to be done. Of course, when we started, we realized that, okay, it is not just about physics or just about chemistry or biology, but all of this needs to be considered together. So for example, for atmospheric part, it is more than just physics. So not just meteorological models. We also need air quality studies, and that's why we have chemical transport models or dispersion models. So basically, which include air chemistry. And the same thing needed to be developed also on the water side. So there were these ocean physics models, but those need to be added with the chemistry part. And as I said, there are two pathways. So through the air and through the water, from ships to the sea. And this requires that there is a thorough understanding, for example, what is scrubber effluents? So how are they sampled, analyzed? What is it made of, and how toxic it is? So we need to have a look beyond the existing discharge criteria. So it's not just about some metals or some polyaromatics. It's a very complicated mixture. And then we also need to learn the biological response of the environment to these effluents. And all of this needs to be done experimentally, and then we can construct models to describe these in a larger scale. So in order to do this kind of integrated assessment, you need to consider both the air and the water pollution, who will suffer, who will benefit, and how much it will cost. So there are still some open questions. So of course we can't answer everything in a single project, but this is just a list of things which we should carry on doing. Of course, we need to find a suitable place to do that. So natural extension of the domain to global one. So that's a policy relevant thing. So scrubbers do not stop at European sea areas. It's everywhere. So there are certain things, for example, for different kinds of air emissions, looking at new fuels and their associated emissions, looking at the climate impacts, and then, for example, on the biological side, identification, habitat, and population loss. So some effects might not be lethal, but they are still harmful. So understanding this, how does it work in a longer time scale? That's something that needs to be looked at. Now, we try to think about from your point of view. So basically looking at a point of view of a person who is thinking about how big is this scrubber issue? So is it a real problem? And if it's a problem, then how do we fix it? Then what does it take to fix it? And if we don't do anything, then where does that lead us? And also looking at these financial issues. So how much would it cost, for example, that if you think about the installation costs and operation costs and then these kind of things. But we will do our best to help you. So that's the message from this talk. And all the consecutive talks that we will hear, they are looking at different aspects, but keeping these key questions in mind. So this is how this event is organized, so that we keep this approach in mind and try to answer these relevant questions. But I don't want to spend too much time on just the introductory part, so I will hand this over to the next speaker, which is going to be Mira, once I find out how to stop this. So I guess I'm still sharing, right?
We can see white font.
Yeah, but I don't have the WebEx panel here, so that's a bit.
Let me check if I can give Mira the rights to share.
Yeah, but that's a bit funny.
I'm trying to share, but it says that Jukka-Pekka is
Yeah,
sharing.
I'm sure that Nikki can stop me. Okay, there it is. Now it's coming.
Okay.
Can you try now?
So I guess you see now. Do you see my screen now?
Yes, and we see
Yes.
what you see ourselves.
See my presentation?
No, we don't see your presentation.
Something is okay. Share again. Now?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you very much.
Okay, let's
have
go to the
10
beginning.
minutes.
Okay, yeah, I'll try. So I will talk about chemical characterization of discharges to water. Of course, our main focus was scrubber water, but as Jukka-Pekka mentioned, we also dedicated some time at the end of the project to characterize other waste streams, mainly grey water. So the main objective of this chemical part was to get a comprehensive view of chemical contaminants coming from shipping discharges with the objective to identify ecotoxicologically relevant contaminants. So I will talk about chemicals detected, the concentrations, but then if this represent a risk and how much, my other colleagues, Eric and Maria, will talk about that. So our work was dedicated to analysis of polyaromatic hydrocarbons, but there we aim to expand the scope of chemical analysis by introducing also alkylated compounds, not just 16 regulated by EPA pHs. And we also analyzed 9 metals. Here, we tried also to put emphasis on evaluating how much of these contaminants are in a dissolved phase and how many of them are bound to particles in scrubber effluents. And then for gray water, we use the methodology based on wide scope screening, where we screened for more than 700 compounds using high resolution mass spectrometry. So part of our work was not just simple analysis, but also method adaptation, method developments and validation that these methods that we are using are appropriate for this purpose. So here is briefly analysis of pHs. So we detected the results that I'm showing are for onboard sampling campaign. So the ship that went from North Sea to the Mediterranean. Let me try if you can see the pointer. Yeah. Okay, you can see the pointer. So we had 13 sampling points altogether, and here you can see the distribution of 16 priority pHs, where we detected quite high concentrations, up to 18 microgram per liter was highest concentration of phenanthrene. Here in the lower part, you can see the concentration of alkyl pHs, and what's remarkable that the total concentration of these alkylated homologs is actually higher than the concentration of pHs. Since we analyzed filtered and non-filtered scrubber water from the difference, we were able to get some conclusions on how many of these compounds are in a dissolved phase and how many of them are in a particle, bound to particles. So here you can see that here's example for one sampling point, number 1, but in general, we detected that alkylated pHs represented from 50 to 75% of all detected pHs. So, and this was the similar situation was like shown here in all samples, and here we can see that compounds were bound in a different proportion to particulate matter from 20 to up to 90%. So this means that if we analyze only 16 pHs regulated, it means that we significantly underestimate pHs pool in a sample. And also, if we only analyze dissolved phase, we underestimate the total pool because high proportion of pHs is bound to particulates. So here it's now a summary of the results for metals. Here I cannot say we detected any surprise. We detected compounds that were already reported to be present at highest concentrations in scrubber water, like zinc, iron, and then followed by uranium, vanadium, copper, arsenic, and manganese. This was in the seawater, but in the scrubber water, the highest concentration was for vanadium, iron, and zinc, and maximum concentrations detected were up to 350 micrograms per liter. And actually, the profile of contaminants was similar along the route of the ship. Regarding particulates, here the colleagues from which group analyzed that? The NanoC. They analyzed the particles larger than 10 micrometers, and they detected that some elements, like here you can see in majority iron, nickel, sulfur, and vanadium were preferentially bound to particulates. Other metals also detected with chromium and titanium. This means that it's very important also to take into account this fraction when analyzing presence and occurrence of contaminants in scrubber water. And finally, regarding grey water, this was done in a collaboration with Baltic Sea Action Group that provided us samples from 5 cargo ships. And we used the methodology based on liquid chromatography, high resolution mass spectrometry that enables us to screen for almost 800 compounds, and we are continuously updating that list of suspects to be screened. Among them are typical contaminants like household contaminants, pharmaceuticals, plasticizers, UV filter, personal care products, but also many industrial chemicals, food-related chemicals, surfactants, etc. And here you can see in this table the list of compounds that were detected and concentrations detected. Some of them are pretty high. So this, of course, then depends on grey water. It's wastewater produced by the crew on the ship, and depending on the size of the crew and their activities, we can detect different types of contaminants there. We think that this is a very good approach and good methodology to screen for new contaminants or to detect previously not identified contaminants, not only in grey water and other ship discharges, and also in scrubber water. The same methodology based on high resolution MS we used to make a list of alkylated pHs to be screened. So I think that these wide scope screening tools are very promising to be used in this field. Regarding our main recommendation and knowledge gaps, it's obvious that from our study that analysis of that is limited to 16 regulated pHs and metals, it's not sufficient to describe contaminants in scrubber water, because scrubber water is very complex matrix containing many other contaminants. Among them are alkylated homologs that represented from 50 to 75% of the total pH pool. Therefore, we think that the occurrence of these contaminants deserves further attention, and they should be included into list of target compounds when assessing the impact of scrubber waters. And now more on the toxicity of these compounds and effects you will hear from colleague Maria. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mira. You're exactly on time.
Yeah. Let me stop sharing.
And now we will move on to Maria Gramberg. How toxic are the scrubber effluents?
Yes, I want to put this. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, but not
Yes.
yet in the presentation mode.
Now.
Now it's there. Perfect.
Yes. Okay, so my name is Maria Granberg, and I will be presenting the ecotoxicological, some key aspects and key findings from the ecotox work done within the eMERGE project. And I'm starting off with this picture because of the sea, as organisms might see it, because often when we talk about shipping, we consider the ships moving through the water, and you often see pictures of ships from above or from the side, but not from below. So the sea is more a surface than the ecosystem that it actually is. And I want to start pointing out that regardless whether you're an organism living on the seafloor or in the open water mass, most of the time you have your reproduction or your larvae grow up in the free water mass in the area where the scrubber water actually ends up. So this is therefore a main focus for us, looking at larvae and pelagic communities of small organisms in the ecotoxicological studies. I'm trying to change slides here. There. Okay, so we were several institutes and universities that conducted ecotoxicological studies. So 5 different, in different parts of the EU, focusing on different waters in the European Union. And some of the tests or experiments carried out were done on single species, and some were done on microbial or communities of small pelagic organisms. Yeah, I will continue. And when you do these kind of experiments, it's not just staying in the lab and putting the scrubber water and the organisms together and see what you find. It's actually a process of detailed control of every step that you investigate, or already from where you collect the water, as you see on this map that Mira also just recently showed. We have collected the scrubber water on board the ships, and you have to have very specific routines for this to keep the integrity of the scrubber water all the way when it arrives in the lab, and you do the dilutions of the scrubber water, choose the organisms to test and how to do this, and what endpoints to measure to produce really ecologically relevant and data that targets really sensitive endpoints and organisms. So it's a really a collaborative project, this and process of producing high quality data. So yeah, in the design, the integrity, as I said, the integrity of the exhaust gas cleaning system, effluent or scrubber water, the ecological relevance, the sensitive life stages, and endpoints that are connected to the fitness of a population have been really important for us to target in the ecotoxicological group. And tests were performed on whole effluents, so using the whole scrubber water and making dilutions of these down to extremely low concentration and up to 100%. And we've tested single species with organisms living in the areas where the scrubber water is also released, from bacteria and microalgae to invertebrates from different organism groups. And effects have been measured from everything to an egg and fertilization of that egg through the larval development and even to the adult stage of the organism. So several different endpoints. And also communities have been tested. As you see here in picture F, for example, you can see a mixture of different microorganisms. Okay. Doesn't really want to change picture here. There you go. So to the results then, this is a picture showing the larvae of a sea urchin. And this is just an example of showing it could be any of these invertebrate organisms that we look at. So you can see what the larvae look like when they've been exposed to different concentrations of seawater from the egg up till 10 days of exposure. So 0% you see is the unexposed, they're only exposed to seawater. This is how they're supposed to look like after 10 days, these small larvae. And if you see then already at an extremely low concentration of 0.0001% scrubber water diluted in seawater, you can see how the development is not functioning properly. They're not developing the skeletons. So you can see some deformed larvae already here. If you then continue to look at, for example, 2% scrubber water or 10, you can see that these larvae are completely misformed. They cannot develop, they will die. And another thing that you can also notice in these pictures is that when the larvae die, you also get an attachment of these combustion particles originating also from the scrubber water, attaching to the dying larvae. And that will change the fate of the contaminants associated with them. So they will not only be in the water, but they will be sinking down to the seafloor. And this is really important information also to understand the fate of these contaminants. I have problems changing. Okay, so what we've done then is to test a lot of different organisms, a lot of different life stages, and measuring a lot of different endpoints, resulting in a number called a LOEC, the lowest effect concentration. And if you look at this graph on the left, you can see how a curve like this looks like. So you have the response and you have the dose of the scrubber water here and the LOEC value. And this LOEC value is what you see in this big graph. So here is some of the key results from the experiments, the enormous amount of experiments done within this project. So we found the lowest effect concentration of various organisms, from bacteria to invertebrates and algae, also microalgae, and different endpoints here on the side that have been measured. And so you see that there is a great variation in the sensitivity depending on what organism you choose and what endpoint you measure. And this is also a skill that you need to have as a biologist then, to choose the right endpoints to measure in order to get information that will protect the environment and the ecosystems.
And less than 2 minutes.
Yeah, and so what you see here is that larval development of various invertebrates was affected at very low concentrations of scrubber water. And the most sensitive endpoints that we measured was the fertilization of the eggs of the sea urchins, where we had an effect already at 10 to -6. So that at a concentration, a very low concentration of scrubber water. Okay, so the final slide here then. So toxic effects were detected at much lower concentrations than previously reported. So that's 0.0001% scrubber water. And the most sensitive species was the green sea urchin, where egg fertilization was significantly reduced at this concentration. And this concentration, the lowest, corresponds to 1 milliliter of effluent in 1 cubic meter of seawater. So it's not much. Early life stages of the invertebrates were very sensitive. They were the most sensitive, and this is, of course, important because then they will not grow up and be adults. And also the invertebrate larvae are important food for commercial fish species. So we might see effects also on commercial populations of fish and cod and herring. This is an example. They're feeding on these larvae. And the pelagic communities, they were not as sensitive, but we could see a change. And the effect of this change is not measured or investigated in this project, but a change in microbial communities may alter the function of this system, which is important for the ecosystem functioning. So finally, the ecotoxicological results from the eMERGE project show that scrubber effluent is highly toxic and may have serious impact on populations of key species of marine food webs, including commercially relevant species. And one of our really important insights is that we need to consider the science, the ecotoxicological and biological science in this type of projects, and not just do tests based on standardized methods, but use the biological and ecotoxicological science as a base for finding out the impacts of this kind of effluents on the marine environment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Maria. I think it's time to let Lars talk about the modeling part in a European scale. So Lars, feel free to step in at your convenience.
Yeah, I'm ready, but Maria has to stop sharing.
Yeah, I'm trying to stop sharing. Or maybe you can help me, Mira. No, or Nikki, I mean.
Yeah, Nikki is omniscient in this, so you can force. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Go ahead, Lars.
Hopefully you see the full screen now.
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Perfect. So I will take a step back and look at the shipping pollution in European sea regions. So at the European scale, and this work is a result of work package 4. So at Met Norway, it has been Manuel Agito and myself working, and of course we have collaborated with many colleagues in work package 4. So the purpose of work package 4 was to assess the effect of shipping, direct discharges, and atmospheric deposition of contaminants in the marine environment. And we have developed an open source model for water pollution, and it's called chemical drift. So we will show some examples on the European scale, and high resolution simulations for case study areas have also been carried out, but it's not going to be presented here. So chemical drift has been developed recently during the project. It's open source, and in a very recent paper you published just a few weeks ago, we did simulations for the North Sea and compared with measurements around oil platforms of PAHs. So there was some monitoring campaign some years ago. And it also compares really well with the well-established DREAM model of SINTEF. So we did comparison with another model and also with the field measurements for some PAHs around oil platforms where you have really high concentrations of PAHs. So chemical drift is a Lagrangian model. So here we get an impression of that. It's we see how the pollution is represented by particles on the European scale along the shipping lanes, and we also see how this is a simulation over 1 year for scenario 3, 2050, and we see how the mixing depth varies through the year. First, we did some simulations for our baseline year 2018. So we see the phenanthrene from open loop scrubbers, the copper due to leaching of antifouling paints, and cadmium from atmospheric deposition. So we see that for Fen and Tren in 2018, open loop scrubbers were mostly used in Northern Europe. Hope you see my pointer here. While the copper was emitted all over our region. And most of the deposition of cadmium took part in the northern parts due to higher precipitation, probably in those areas. And we've looked at the mass balance of different sea areas around Europe. So this is how the sea areas are defined. And then using a Lagrangian model, you can make mass balance tables like this. And there are some interesting cases. We can look at the Norwegian Sea, for example, here. It is a quite clean sea, very low mass of cadmium is emitted here, 77 kilos. But the residual mass is 300%. So this means that a lot of cadmium is imported into the Norwegian Sea. While on the other hand, the Biscaya-Iberian Sea is a big exporter of cadmium, while most of the other seas are close to 100%, so they keep most of the cadmium in the area. We have also looked at the difference between different metals. So for example, lead has a high affinity to particles, so it sinks quickly to the bottom, and most of the lead stays in the area where it is emitted, while the nickel has lower affinity, and it is moving more horizontally to different areas. So it looks quite different due to chemistry. This is an example of a PAH, benzoapyrene, from open loop scrubbers for the highest, where we compare the high scrubber scenario 3 for 2050, with our baseline year. And the upper figures here are for the water column, and the lower figures are for the sediments. And here we see the results for 2018, where most of the pollution takes place in Northern Europe, while in 2050 it's more spread out. So we see the pollution in sediments and in the water column. And then we see the difference here, and we see an increase of more than 1,000% of concentrations between 2018 and 2050 for the high scrubber scenario 2050. So amazing, big increase in concentrations. But even if the increase is large, will it be dangerous? So we compare with the predicted no effect concentration values that has been developed by Maria and colleagues. And if you look at, for example, copper from anti-fouling paint, then we see that there are just some areas close to Hamburg and Rotterdam, very busy ports, where we have concentrations above the PNAC value. And in some areas, we have 10% of the PNAC value, the yellow areas here. And then for dibenzoanthracene from open loop scrubbers, which is a quite toxic pH, we see concentrations close to or above 10% of the PNAC value in the English Channel here. So there are limited areas with high concentrations, but we have to stress that this is just for one compound. So we have to look at the combined effect of all the compounds, the so-called cocktail effect. So as a summary, we have developed an open source chemical transport model, chemical drift, and it has been developed against observations of pHs in the North Sea. We have shown some examples on the European scale. And we have to remember that only pollution from shipping is shown here. Pollution from oil platforms, rivers, sewage, industry, etc. adds up to this. So the combined effect might be above the PNAC values. So for single compounds, the concentrations are rarely above the PNAC value in our simulations, but we have to consider the cocktail effect. So there is an upcoming publication which shows much more detail on these simulations. And we also refer to the work package 4 deliverables. So here are the publications that we have recently published and where we based this presentation on. So the publication on chemical drift, publication on the validation of these simulations, and then the upcoming publication on where we do the simulations on the European scale. We also refer to the website where you can download chemical drift and do your own simulations. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Lars. So now is time for questions. So we have heard the first 4 talks, and we have reserved some time for discussion before we break for coffee. So does anybody have any questions concerning the talks that presented thus far? I can raise one discussion point that is being bothering me. So basically, I'm thinking about this cocktail effect. So basically, somebody might say that, okay, you just keep adding the number of pollutants until you reach the level which would be harmful to the environment. Then this kind of question will be inevitably received at some point. So I think this is more for Maria than Lars, I guess.
So what was your question now?
I'm thinking about okay, somebody might say that okay, if you have thousands and thousands of compounds in the scrubber water, since it's very complex, so are you just adding up the number of pollutants so that you eventually end up at the higher range of the risk, so that you get the result what you want?
No, not really. I mean, we are testing the whole effluent when we do these experiments. So when we dilute the effluent, so the effluent will contain all of these contaminants and also be acidic and contain the nutrients and all different kinds of things. And then we dilute it with seawater. And this is the compounds that are still in the water would be the ones that are in the water in our experiments as well as in the sea when you have this kind of dilution. So it's the ecotox studies are based on a dilution series, and the modeling is also not the one that maybe that Lars was showing now, but some of the modeling that we do, the dilution modeling, is also just based on a dilution of the scrubber water. And when we compare them, they are actually, I mean, you are not comparing apples and pears and adding up. You are actually comparing real numbers with diluted water in a model. But maybe you also want to add something, Lars, to that. I was just putting you on the spot.
No, I just want to say that we have so far looked mostly at single compounds, so we have not reached, we are discussing how to present this cocktail effect. It's very complex to include all the, as we've seen in the previous presentations as well, include all the compounds and present it in a meaningful and understandable way. So it's a challenge for us. We hope to discuss this in this publication that we will submit very soon.
Okay, Mira, I see your hand.
Yeah, I hope Eric will say at the end in the second part something about risk assessment. But typically, even if we have and we can detect thousands of compounds in the scrubber water, typically you have a situation that a very limited number of compounds contribute to the toxicity of that sample. So this curve normally goes from you have 2, 3, 4, 5 compounds that contribute 90% of the toxicity, and then you have a very long tail of compounds that contribute very little to the toxicity, although they are present there. And it's important not to look into concentrations. What I presented in the first presentation, you may have a contaminant present in highest concentration but of low toxicity, and in the end will contribute very little to the toxicity of whole sample. But you are right, then this mixture effect, it's extremely difficult to model, to quantify, because you have very different situations there, synergic effects, antagonistic effects, simple addition of effect, etc. And every sample, it's like a different story. So you need to take into account differences between samples, metrics, etc., and presence of contaminants.
Yeah, I was thinking about these analogs that already exist on the regulatory side. So basically, if you think about oil, so there are regulations which set limits for oil pollution. So these are concentration limits. So in those sense, it is a mixture of many things. So it is not a single compound. Okay, Maria, go ahead.
Yeah, I should say that we know very little about the toxicity of the alkylated pHs that we find in quite high concentrations. And also we tend to think about the mixture of the contaminants, but we have a similar mixture of organisms in the sea, and we're only measuring a fraction of them and a fraction of the endpoints that we could be measuring. And so we're trying to find the most sensitive one. But there is also the diversity of organisms that could potentially be affected. So we have a very complex exposure situation and a very complex environment to assess.
Yeah, at some point, I remember you saying that very little is known of sublethal effects. So even if the effect is not killing the organism immediately, so what happens when it is exposed to this lower pollutant concentrations, but for a very long time. So at some point you were saying that, okay, for example, for fish, so you can't draw this kind of a conclusion based on 20 days of experimenting. So how I'm thinking about this the conflicting results from different studies. So as we know, there are several studies of ecotoxicology or this effluent testing made in different parts of the world, and some of those are showing very conflicting results. So did you have a time to familiarize yourself with the methodology from our US colleagues?
Are you thinking about the one presented
At the IMO?
Yeah. No, yeah. I don't think that we ever got the real information or data on how they did it. I cannot really remember that I've seen that, but there are several studies. There are some Danish studies, for example, and there are Japanese studies. And when you look through these investigations, many times, it has to do with the choice of methodology. This is why I was explaining in detail that it's a course of events that need to be carefully thought through before you end up with your final result. And in each of these steps, from collecting the sample until you have your data result. You can make mistakes, or you can change, or you can do something that changes the integrity of the scrubber water, or the species that you collect are not representative of what the species are in the sea. They are reared in the lab and have a very limited genetic pool, for example. And so in all of these steps, you can reduce the possibility of detecting effects. And it's not like you are trying to produce effects, but it's actually trying to be as ecologically relevant and representing the exposure scenario as precise as possible in the lab, as it would be in the field. And this is what we have been really thinking about in this eMERGE project, trying to together understand and tweak every little step and think of every little detail, and then try to look at organisms with a great variability to get as a diverse and precise measure as possible. And so this is where some of these studies many times, I wouldn't say fail, but so you can, for example, differ. Like if you have changed the pH of the seawater, for example, the exposure water, or you have filtered, as Mira showed, that when you filter the scrubber water, you would remove one of the fractions, and then you expose that water, it would not be the same. So that is where the differences most of the time occur. That was a long explanation of a short.
Oh, but it is a complicated thing. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't expect you to summarize everything in 2 sentences. Okay. Do we have any other questions? No. Okay. Then we will break for coffee, and we will see you all in 20 minutes. So let's get a cup of coffee and come back in 20 minutes. So now we move on to this atmospheric side of things. So Jana Moldanova will fill us in on the atmospheric studies. So Jana, go ahead.
Thank you, Jukka-Pekka. Good afternoon. I will soon share this. Let's see. Yes.
We see it. Yeah.
Very good. I just am thinking if there is possibility of a pointer.
Right click on your mouse.
Sorry?
Right click your mouse.
Okay.
And I think it will give you some options. No?
No, not really. Maybe if it's over the
down left, I think, on your slide. You can there are
but
some
can you
tools.
see my pointer over the yeah.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, good. Good afternoon. Sorry for this delay. I will now present some results from atmospheric studies performed in eMERGE, and I will do this on behalf of many colleagues, both from IVL and from University of Hertfordshire, who were coordinating VP5, then from FMI, from University of Aveiro, University of Thessaloniki, University of Southampton, and University of Venice. And I will focus on especially on atmospheric deposition part of this study, but I will also show some results from impacts on air quality. VP5 had 4 different objectives or tasks, and the first was, of course, to prepare current atmospheric emissions originating from shipping in Europe, and to use them in high-resolution models and to establish some sort of emission baseline for the current situation, which in our case we have chosen year 2018. Then we as we were using a whole battery of atmospheric models, so one task was dedicated to refine the atmospheric composition models and to evaluate their performance for quantifying the impacts of shipping. Then we have be using model on several scales. On the right hand side here you can see the model domain for the whole Europe, where we were running these models, and then we have so that was one task, and the second was to focus on case studies where high resolution models were deployed. These were partly the same, partly some different models. In case studies, I will not be talking about case studies in my presentation, but you will hear some detail in the upcoming talk, and that would be on the Piraeus case study. So for the region model methodology, there were 3 different regional models used. That was CMAC, SILAM, and EMAP. These are quite established models used in Europe. CMAC and EMAP were on 15 kilometer resolution and SILAM 5 kilometer resolution. And we have conducted different model runs. It was always a couple, one with shipping emission and one without. And these were performed first for year 2018, that's the current situation, and then for 2 future year, that means 2050 scenarios. You have already heard about these scenarios, but I would just highlight the first one was both had increase in the total volumes of shipping, and the first one was without any additional. When it comes to the strategy of use of fossil fuel use, no additional measures. The second one had the S8 has high LNG and methanol usage. But what was significant difference in the first scenario, we have high use of scrubbers. That means high use heavy fuel oil, and also in this scenario we have NECA established in all Europe. In S8 we have low or no use of scrubbers, and we have NECA only in the already established NECA. So we don't have NECA in the Mediterranean Sea region and in Atlantic coast. So for the so these are the scenario studies, and I will just show some highlights from these. You have been already listening to the impact of shipping on discharges of contaminants to the sea, and here you can see a map of contribution of shipping through atmospheric deposition to contribution of metals to both to land, but especially to the sea areas. And you can see in 2018 there are high emissions or high. This is deposition, so this is high deposition. Then you can see in the S3 scenario, that is use of heavy fuel oil and scrubbers, you can see really a large decrease. And then in the S8 scenarios, when we have the alternative fuels and no scrubbers and no heavy fuel oil, you can see that the deposition decreases even more. But importantly, on the right-hand side, you can see the annual contributions through the atmospheric deposition and through discharges in these scenarios. So in the blue, you can see atmospheric deposition, and in orange, you can see the discharges. And I have chosen some metals which are nickel and vanadium are metals which are typical connected to or coupled to emissions or to combustion of heavy fuel oil. Then you have zinc, which is more maybe connected to lubricants, and also the use of metals in the equipment, or let's see, of scrubbers or engines, and that's the same for iron. So you can see that here you have for the 2018 we can see that the discharges in Baltic Sea, North Sea, that's where the emission control area has been established, so the discharges are higher, somewhat higher than for the atmospheric deposition, while the opposite is true for the Mediterranean Sea, where we don't have SECA, so we have use of heavy fuel oil, and this is 2018. So this is before the scrubbers were come into use. And here you can see high atmospheric deposition and relatively low contribution from discharges. So this is related not to the scrubber water, but to other discharges from the ships, as you have been listening to in the first part of the webinar. Now what happens in 2050 when we have this high use of scrubbers? Here it's good to look at this change in scale, where we go from 80 to 3000, and these are contributions, and you can see that there is much higher contributions, so the contributions are not all that much, but this is what is increased in the Mediterranean Sea, where you can see that, of course, that the atmospheric deposition is low, but we have high contributions from the scrubber water, from discharges, or this increase is related to the scrubber water. In the S8 scenario, that is the alternative fuels, you can see that the atmospheric deposition has almost diminished, and we have basically the discharges are very similar to those in 2018. That means that these are, as said, discharges or contaminants coming with discharges which are related to other sources of contaminants than the scrubber water.
You have less than 2 minutes.
Oh, thank you. So just then I will, apart from discharges, we have also the deposition of metals. We have also one problem, or one contaminant, one pollutant associated with shipping is deposition of nitrogen. And here I just wanted to show that the deposition, atmospheric contribution of nitrogen to as a source of nutrients to sea is quite high relatively to other sources or to discharges associated with shipping. Then we have also been looking at air pollutants and how the scenario compares. And here, what is important is that we have the NECA established in Mediterranean region. So here you have concentrations of NO2 in the Mediterranean region in 2018. Then you have in S3, so you can see the overall decrease in, this is not concentration, but this is population weighted concentration. That means that corresponds to exposure to air pollutants. So one can see decrease in exposure to NO2, while there is in the S8 scenario, where is no NECA, so one can see no nitrogen emission control area in whole Europe. So one can see much higher or basically no change in NO2 exposures in in Mediterranean city regions. I will to sort of keep time. I will skip the ozone impact on ozone and PM2.5. Here there is not really much difference. Here you can see a large decrease in PM exposure due to establishment of sulfur emission limit. And I will just go to conclusion. The deposition of ash particles and associated metals in scenario 3 show, in comparison with year 2018, increase or no trend in the current SECA areas. In other sea regions, the ash deposition decreases with 70 to 75%, and in scenario 8, it decreases even further to 94 to 98%. The shipping contribution, I will now skip the nitrogen, and we can see that the population-weighted concentration in Mediterranean cities highlight the mitigation of shipping-related PM2.5 contribution in both scenarios, while emphasizing the superior performance of S3 introduction of Mediterranean NECA in control, link NO2 and ozone contributions. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Jana. I think this was a very useful summary from the air side. The story goes on beyond the deposition, but now we should hear Erik Utreberg talking about the environmental risk assessment. So go ahead, Erik.
Thank you. You hear me, right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Let me see if I have the possibility to share here. Yep. See in full screen?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. Right, thank you. I will give a presentation that is mostly results published in our eMERGE deliverable 6.1, and in that deliverable, most of the teams were presented. So this presentation is basically on behalf on most of the eMERGE teams. And when it comes to evaluation of environmental risk or impacts, one simplified way to estimate the impact is to compare the relative contribution of metals and pHs. So this is also something that Jana showed in her presentation, and also what Mira showed when it comes to the concentration of pHs and metals included in the scrubber effluent water. So we in a publication that was published 2 years ago, we wanted to actually compare what is the share from scrubbers in relation to other sources, and not only the sources from shipping, but also from other natural and anthropogenic sources. So we included atmospheric deposition, direct point sources, so that is wastewater treatment plants, coastal ones, and also industries, and then river and input, and then the input from different waste streams of ships, and also anti-fouling paints from leisure boats. And in this study, we used steam data, so activity data from 2018. And during that time, we only had 178 ships operating with scrubbers. This is in the Baltic Sea region. That was our study area. And our results show then that for vanadium, which you see in the top figure here, that the share from shipping was 18% compared to the total input to the Swedish exclusive economic zone. And the vast majority of this input from ships is then from open loop scrubbers. We also saw that for a few pHs, we also had a large share from ships, up to almost 9% is actually coming from these ships operating with scrubbers. We did also look at anti-fouling coatings, or we looked at copper. And what you see to the right is then the environmental status as assessed by HELCOM. So the parts that are green, you can't really see them, they achieve good environmental status. But the ones that are red, which is more or less the entire Baltic Sea, this is the region where we do not full good environmental status in the sediment in terms of copper concentration. And what you see then to the right is then what is then the total input of copper from various sources. So the main anthropogenic source here is actually anti-fouling coatings that are coated on ships, and to a smaller share also on leisure boats. So this is some of the information that we are able to derive within the eMERGE project using primarily the steam data, and then compare that with other sources. But when it then comes to like risk, and this is a simplified way, I would say, but when it comes to risk and impact assessment, we have learned a lot during the previous talks, primarily by Mia. And we also have some guidelines that we used within the eMERGE, produced by the IMO, so MEPC. So you have these guidelines that were produced 2022, which is called Guidelines for Risk and Impact Assessment of the Discharge Water from Exhaust Gas Cleaning Systems. And you get a lot of information on how to actually conduct these kind of risk and impact assessment. And one thing is stipulated in regulation 7.4, which says that the adoption of restriction or a ban of discharged water from EGCS, so that is scrubbers, should be considered in areas where any of the following indicative criteria are fulfilled. And then we have 4 different criteria. So the first one is that the environmental objectives in the area are not met. And then they refer to that good chemical status, good ecological status, or good environmental status are not achieved. And that is under the Water Framework Directive and the Marine Strategy Framework Directive when it comes to EU legislation. The second one is that the discharge of scrubber water represent an additional risk of deteriorating the environment. And the third one is about if the discharge is in conflict with other sea conventions like the UNCLOS. And the fourth one is if the input of primarily then pHs and metals will then result to cost of management of dredged material imports. And during this talk, I will focus on the first 2 indicative criteria. So the first one that we see here is that do we fulfill good environmental status. So that is what the member state has then compiled data and done their assessment in 2018. And here is the result from that compilation. We used data from EU-wise Marine, which is basically what EU member state has reported in 2018. And we used the one-out, all-out concept. So this is an aggregated map showing all the descriptor and the indicators. So basically, if we're looking at the impact assessment and the regulation 7.4, this shows that the ban on discharged water from scrubbers should be considered in most European waters, so the areas where it is red in the map. When it comes to the second part, or the second bullet point here, this is where you need to perform an environmental risk assessment. And this is also what Lars talked a little bit about in his presentation, that you need to have these kind of exposure models where you predict environmental concentrations. So that is what OpenDrift can produce. And then for individual substances. And then you need to have these PNEC values. So that's the predicted no effect concentration for those individual substances. And what you do later is then you compare your PEC value with your PNEC value to produce these risk characterization ratios. And if that number is less than 1, you come to the conclusion that you have an acceptable environmental risk. Or if it's above 1, you said that the risk is unacceptable. And if you have several substances, which we have in scrubber water, you summarize these risk characterization ratios. And then you see if it's above 1 or less than 1 to define if it's acceptable or unacceptable to discharge the water. The challenge with scrubber discharge water is that we have identified over 60 substances. And it is very time consuming to derive these PEC values because it takes a lot of resources to do this exposure modeling. And also we are also lacking these threshold values, so the PNEC values for the vast majority of the substances. So another way to handle this, and what we have done in Emerge and what Mia showed you, is to use these whole effluent tests. And this is also recommended in the guidelines, the MEPC guidelines. So as you see here, that you can derive these called PNEC general values. So this is then the predicted no effect concentration, but it's instead of being produced based on individual substances, it is based on the whole effluent tests. So it considers all substances that are actually present in the scrubber water. And then you compare that to predicted environmental concentration of the scrubber water, so not the individual substances. So what we have been doing within Emerge is to use all the ecotoxicological data that Mia presented previously, and then we followed the European Commission technical guidance document called TGD 27 on how to produce these PNEC values, or environmental quality standards that they also are called. And in that technical guidance document, it is recommended that you should use an assessment factor of 500 on your lowest no observed effect concentration. So that is then your critical value. So we use that, and you see here that is kind of like grayish. that is our PNEC values for scrubber water. So it's 2 × 10⁻⁻8. That is like the threshold value for what the environment can cope with. And
you have 1 minute.
yes, thank you. So what our colleagues, Göran Broström from Gothenburg University, he used this dilution model where he predicted the environmental concentration of open loop scrubber water in the Öresund region in 2018. So that is what you see here in the map. So the yellow and green part, these are then the highest concentration, and then you see in the legend down in the bottom here, that is our PNEC general, so the dark blue color. So any color that is brighter than this, or green or yellow, indicates that we have an unacceptable risk. So the concentration in the environment clearly exceeds our threshold value. So to summarize, based on these 2 bullet points that we just showed you, our emerge impact assessment following these MEPC guidelines show that the ban on discharge water from scrubber should be considered in most of the European waters, according to these guidelines document. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Eric. Then it is time to move on to the case studies. So we have several in emerge, but we are going to today talk about one. So Vasilis Tservakis will present us the Piraeus case study. So go ahead, Vasilis, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jukka-Pekka. You can see my screen?
Yes, but not in presentation mode yet.
Let me try. I cannot see it yet in presentation mode myself. Why is that? Oh, okay. Can you see it now in full mode?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Well, I'm Vasilis Tservakis from the University of the Aegean, and I represent a group of 2 laboratories and many younger and more active people than I do. So I was selected probably due to age to present. This work is a common work. I'm trying to share to change my slide now, and somehow, okay. So this work has been performed mainly by 3 laboratories. The forcing regarding the shipping pollution came from work from the Finnish Meteorological Institute. The atmospheric work was performed by the group of Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, and the marine work by the University of the Aegean. First of all, I should stress that the region that we are analyzing, the whole metropolitan area of Piraeus and Athens, and the marine area that is directly connected to that, which is the Thessaloniki Gulf, is the main urban center of Greece, and it is the center of many activities, which also are sources of pollution. So there is intensive traffic, both merchant and passenger traffic around the ports. There are ship building and maintaining industries at the dark blue area called Perama. There are several oil refineries at the northern part of the bay, and also there is a lot of industrial air emission, as well as urban wastewater management plan at the islet of Psyttalia. So the major challenge in our case, both for atmospheric and the marine groups, is to quantify and isolate the impact of shipping from all the other sources of air and sea pollution. we followed the same approach that the other groups described already, which means that we tried to make a 2018 evaluation based on and the evaluation of our models based on measurements. And then we try to assess the conditions during a high use of scrubber scenario 3 for 2050, and also the use of alternative fuel scenario. Our model, of course, it consists of several models. The atmospheric model, there are two models used at gradually increasing resolutions, focusing at the area of Piraeus, and also the oceanic grid of the model. The oceanic models are centered in the Thessaloniki Gulf, having a varying resolution between 500 and 800 meters. Especially regarding the marine modeling, it involves definition of the several sources of pollution, the lateral sources of pollution, the definition of the shipping input of pollution, the atmospheric deposition fluxes from the atmospheric group. Also, we have the flux from the open boundaries. We put these into both the circulation and the biochemical model, and then we have the output in the form of four-dimensional maps of selected pollutants. Now, regarding the atmospheric work, first of all, there have been two meteorological station positions where we were able to assess and evaluate the model and assess the contribution of shipping emissions to the total concentrations of pollutants in the region. And we see that, for example, the Perama region, the shipbuilding region, is mostly contributing during winter due to the maintenance work on boats, while the other three locations where measurements are made show an increase during summer and decrease during the winter due to the traffic of the port. Regarding the air emissions, the results are quite similar to the ones previously shown by Jana, which is that for example, at least for NOx and SOx, the contribution currently of shipping to the total pollutants is about 20%, 18 to 20%, and there's a very significant decrease using scenario 3, and a much higher decrease during if we go to alternative fuels, where of course we have some increase in methane. The main contributor appears to be the land traffic. I'm trying to change my slide again. Oh, there. Now we go to the sea. If we look at the typical results from the biochemical model, we see that the pollution is located mostly along the shores, where the location of the land sources of pollution exist. So the shipping contribution is very small. So in order to actually locate and assess the impact from the sea, it is imperative to isolate the scrubber impact. If we look at the results of the two scenarios, we see, however, that there is a significant increase of both of heavy metals concentrations and the aromatic hydrocarbons, which, despite the fact that the dominant that shipping is not the dominant part, which means that actually this is a quite large increase. However, I have to run fast, and And I'll go directly to our approach to assess the impact of the scrubbers. And we devised a new method called the dilution method, where we, by taking each and every one of the various pollutants used in the that are outputted from the biochemical model, we're able to assess to what degree these pollutants constitute a whole effluent, a scrubber effluent, which means the turbulent stage at which they are still diluted scrubber water and not that can be treated as an entirety of water coming from scrubbers, just diluted. So in that case, we were able to connect our results with the wet experiments of the ecotoxicological impacts, and we see the results here. We see, for example, that if we use the dilution rate, the PNEC value of 2 times 10 to the 8th, 1 over 2 times 10 to the 8th, that means we find that the scrubber water exists there at higher than PNEC values for more than 80% of the time. And if we assess the time that we can track it, even at almost 2 orders of magnitude higher concentrations, we find it at about 30% of the time, which means that we expect actually quite significant adverse effects of marine on the marine organisms on the even in the offshore areas of the Sarnikos Gulf. So I think that the results of our study show that if we continue on scrubbers, we should highly recommend the use of closed loop. I hope I was in time. So thanks for the attention from all these people, and I hope I have not forgotten many of them too.
Thank you, Vasilis. I think you did just fine. Now it is time to look at the costs and benefits. So basically, this is Wilfried's territory. So go ahead, Wilfried.
Thank you very much, Jukka-Pekka. I'm trying now to share my screen. Should work just now. And I also need to move into presentation mode. Now you should be able to see the presentation mode. Is that correct?
Yes. Perfect.
Okay. The work that we did was on pulling together information from the earlier work packages of the project to derive an overarching view of the different elements that constitute shipping's impact on the environment. And for that, we used cost-benefit analysis. I will show you briefly the shipping impacts. I will show you the emerged scenarios, the costs and benefits derived from these emerged scenarios, benefits in terms of reduced emissions. We have worked on side effects of the different measures that constitute the scenarios. And we also have provided a decision support tool that allows both stakeholders to take a view on shipping impacts and us modelers to create a common language that we get a common understanding of the issues of marine and atmospheric pollution. And finally, I will come with some overall conclusions. Shipping emissions and impacts, well, we have discussed that. There is a number of atmospheric impacts, emissions to the atmosphere, there's emissions to the water, and the impacts, the endpoints regard human health, they regard marine biota, there is land ecosystems that are affected, and the climate that is affected. We have altogether 9 scenarios that have been created within eMERGE with somewhat different assumptions. The first 4, including 3, the first 5, so to say, because 3 and 3b have been separated only later. They have no ambition to reduce greenhouse gases, while the final 4 do look into greenhouse gas emissions. The assumptions are different policies regarding reduction of nitrogen and sulfur, and there are also different assumptions regarding growth of ship traffic. We use these scenarios in order to calculate the impact on the respective sea regions. In order to come to the sea regions, we use the steam model results that show the shipping lanes, and we use the sea regions as they have been defined, where we aggregate some, especially those of the Mediterranean and those of the subregions of the Irish Sea, but we still have about a dozen of individual sea regions to consider and to look in separately. What that allows us to do is we have an understanding of the measures that have been implemented or will be implemented. We have an understanding of the costs that these measures have to be that these measures require if ships are implementing them. And then we have an understanding of relative costs and total costs per sea region. What do we see on this graph? First of all, we see that each bar for each sea region stands for one of the scenarios. That means there are 9 bars for each of the sea regions, and with more political will, with higher emphasis on abatement, also the overall costs increase, and overall costs increase more in regions where there is more traffic. So the Mediterranean Sea or the Atlantic Ocean have very high costs. Also the North Sea, just because there is many ships. But we also see that the scenarios differ by the policies that are implemented. So we note that in the Black Sea, we see a lot of impacts due to open loop scrubbers and SCR, while in the Arctic Ocean, we would rather see costs being raised due to LNG consumption. And of course, in the low carbon scenarios, the costs of methanol add up pretty highly. We do understand the cost efficiency of the respective measures. The 99% SO2 reduction for scrubbers work in theory. In practice, they will not be fully exploited because the scrubbers will not operate on full speed, but only as much as they are needed. So we would expect to have something like 80 or 90% emission reductions. We also can translate that into costs per kilogram of compounds abated, each individual measure. And we do understand that compared to land-based sources, and this is a graph for land-based sources from the Gaines model, we are on the lower end of sulfur and NOx emissions, for PM emissions and carbon dioxide emissions. The measures that have been introduced here are rather measures that do these reductions on the side, and therefore the costs are not as efficient as the reductions on land-based sources are. But that is just a selection of the measures that have been introduced in eMERGE and not a general feature. We think we can achieve more also for marine sources if we focus on greenhouse gases and PM pollution. We come up with an effect matrix where we look into each individual measure that we have been able to identify and that eMERGE collected data on. There is one primary target, which is the reduction of sulfur dioxide, NOx, and with some question mark, with an asterisk on LNG and methanol engines, the reduction of carbon dioxide. The data that we have been collecting also on costs does not really refer to fossil-free LNG and methanol, because this data is not available yet. But starting the process requires to get the machinery operating, and that's why they are included here. We also note that there is co-benefits of introducing measures with other advantages. So introducing scrubbers will reduce SO2, but also particulate matter. Introducing NOx reductions will have effects on human health, but co-benefits on eutrophication and acidification. We also have to understand that there are trade-offs, often in terms of additional fuel penalties, but there are also cross-media impacts that have to be considered, have been considered partly already, but require further investigation while these items are being implemented. So one of them being the negative impact of scrubber effluents on marine life.
You have approximately 1 minute.
We have the decision support tool introduced that helps us characterize the respective impacts against each other, where we look into marine life as well as life on land, as well as human impacts. And this allows us to come up with conclusions that show us that we have now achieved a consistent cause-effect chain, not only for air pollution, but also for scrubber water within the eMERGE project. We do understand that the residual oil fuels, even after combustion, contains a complex mixture of noxious compounds. These are a problem in the atmosphere, but they are also a problem if they are disposed of into the sea. So they need to be disposed of properly. There are co-benefits of climate targets. The abating of fossil fuels certainly helps removing residual oil as a shipping propellant. There are, however, side effects of alternative fuels that clearly need further consideration. The costs of emission abatement differs by scenario and sea region, depending on the legal requirements. That shows that there's a lot of room to maneuver. There's a lot of things to allow the shipping industry to decide properly. Finally, quantification of environmental costs, the damage costs, that relies on establishing agreed methods. And this is not just a scientific problem. That is a problem that requires policy interaction, that requires stakeholder interaction, This is why we are doing this, this workshop today. And here we need to have further consultation with policies in order to come to good conclusions. In the atmosphere, this has been working for decades, while in the marine phase, this is rather new. With this, I close. Thank you for your attention and say thank you to all the contributors that have allowed us to pull these things together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wilfried. This brings us very nicely to the last topic of the agenda, so the last talk of the agenda, and this is the policy support efforts. So we have already some of those done in eMERGE, but I would like to go through them and offer our help, because there's a whole bunch of things that we have already done, but let's have a short overview on those. Okay, so this is a slide which includes the things that we have already done. So we have reached out to the IMO. Both PPR and MEPC have submissions from our research findings. So based on the work that was done in eMERGE, there were 2 documents that were sent for IMO discussions. Unfortunately, this topic was postponed to MEPC 82 meeting. So this means next October, there will be a debate at the MEPC 82 about scrubbers and what to do with them. So I know that some partners, we already sit in national delegations as scientific advisors, and this would be an excellent opportunity, for example, for the ecotoxicological experts to participate, because I have a feeling that there will be a strong pushback from the industry. So we need to be able to defend our findings and say that, okay, this is our findings, what we have done in eMERGE, they are consistent with the approaches that are commonly used, and they are also defendable from the science point of view. Now, other things than IMO, we have also been active on HELCOM. So HELCOM Maritime, FMI does this annual reporting of air emissions, discharges, and underwater noise emissions from ships to HELCOM Maritime. So the tools that we used for this reporting is those are the ones that were revised in eMERGE. So basically what was added is the ability to model the ambient effects on air emissions, discharges, and noise. So this means that we model the effect of sea ice, sea currents, waves, and winds on ships. So these are now considered, and they also go to this Copernicus atmosphere monitoring service that we contribute to. So all these revisions to these modeling tools, they are already put to good use in other forums. Also for OSPAR, so we've been active both on MIME, so this is the monitoring and trends and effects on substances in the marine environment, and the HASEC group, so Hazardous Substances and Eutrophication Committee. So eMERGE results were brought to attention to these 2 groups, and then there was a request from OSPAR side to prepare a separate study about scrubber discharges in OSPAR sea areas. So that was a kind of a spin-off from eMERGE, but it used the tools which were partly developed in eMERGE. We are also active on ICES, so International Council for the Exploration of the Seas. So we have one co-chair and one consortium member active in the working group SHIP of the ICES. So this is to disseminate the findings of eMERGE and kind of spread the word internationally, so that there would be a continued cooperation between different countries on the research side. Also, the EU strategy for the Baltic Sea region, so basically the priority area SHIP, they granted the eMERGE project the flagship status. So this involves regular updates of eMERGE findings to priority area SHIP, both the operational group and the steering group. So the next meeting is on June 12th, and my colleague from IVL, Erik Fridell, will represent eMERGE in that. So basically we communicate our science findings directly to the environmental stakeholders, which are usually representatives of Environmental Protection Agency or relevant ministries around the Baltic Sea countries. We also contributed to the first and the second EMTER reports, so European Maritime Transport Environment Report. So these are big summary report done in cooperation with EMSA and European Environment Agency. So those are very valuable to us because we can provide a lot of help in drafting these documents by donating data. And of course, we are expanding. So basically, we are already involving EMSA through the Copernicus. So there is a specific task which is tailored for EMSA purposes. So we are also applying the latest tools that we have to serve the needs of from the EMSA side. And also we are in discussions with the national environmental authorities. So this is the Italian Friuli Venezia region environmental authority, also the Swedish Water Authority, then the Finnish Transport and Safety Agency, and also the German BSH. And also together with our sister project Skipper, we have also had contacts into this bond agreement and the compliance monitoring part. So that is mostly Skipper contributions, but also this emission control part applies to eMERGE. Now, there was already a presentation of these maps, so I'm not going to go through these in detail, but suffice to say that, okay, there are these evaluations, kind of an overall assessment of the status of different sea areas, so both in European scale and also Helcom HOLAS 3 assessment includes a more accurate representation by sea basin in the Baltic Sea. So, but the bottom line, the message is that, okay, the sea itself in the European sea regions, it's not in good conditions. So basically, if you add the scrubber effluent in these sea areas, it doesn't make it any better. So it makes it worse. So this is the kind of a justification that, okay, if there is a requirement from the policy side that you should not make things worse, then this is what happens with scrubbers. Now, when we come to the section that where we can help, so basically the message from the IMO side is that, okay, if you want to reduce the impact from scrubber effluents different sea areas, it's unlikely that there will be a global ban of scrubbers. So there is no support for this. But there are two other things that can happen. So you either act on the discharges themselves, or you set the limit values of the effluent discharges at such a level that all harmful components are removed. I don't know if this is feasible from technical point of view, but if you continue to release the effluent to the sea, then at least the least we can do is that, okay, we need to make sure that it's not harmful anymore. Now, there are already several port level and national level bans for open loop discharges. So for example, inside the 12 nautical miles, you can see these areas. For example, the Chinese coastline is such an area. So France and Denmark have declared these, and also Sweden and Finland are thinking about these. However, if you are thinking of expanding the effluent discharge ban outside the 12 nautical miles, the territorial waters, then it means that it has to go through the IMO. This was a very clear statement from this legal counsel of the IMO. So they were interpreting the maritime law, saying that, okay, 12 nautical miles, if you want to ban it in this zone, then it's your business. But if you are stepping out of the 12 nautical miles, then you have to go through the IMO. The message that we want to convey from eMERGE is that, okay, we have done the background science work. So we can provide the science basis for this kind of impact assessments if there is a policy action that aims at regulating scrubbers. Of course, if you are going to do this in a way that you would have a regional ban on scrubbers, then it means that there would have to be a policy instrument which establishes this kind of ban area. So currently there is not such a thing. which means that if something like this would be suggested, then we probably would need to act on the MARPOL and its revision. So basically then it would become possible to declare certain sea areas as these kind of a discharge ban areas. And then after that, somebody would suggest that, okay, we establish this kind of a ban area for a certain sea region. Now, regardless of this, it requires that there is a support at EU level for this kind of action, because this is sulfur is a topic of EU competence. So we can help, but we probably can't be the ones who are going to spearhead this. Now, the last summary that I have is that, okay, even if you ban the effluent discharge inside the 12 nautical miles, it will only delay the inevitable, because the effluents will be transported to the coastlines. It will end up in the sediments anyway, so it will not prevent the contamination of the coastlines. Now, the effluent itself, it's a very complex mixture. It is not just polyaromatic hydrocarbons and metals. It is also much more, as Mira showed in her talk. So it's a very complex mixture. There's also, if you look at the air emissions, so if you add a scrubber to a ship, there are some indications that you are actually generating more small particles. So that was a bit of a surprise. So you may be emitting more particles if you add scrubbers. Now, whole effluent testing with multiple organisms. So we remember that even if the dilution was 1 to 1 million, you still have on some of the most sensitive species, you still see an effect. So it depends on the species, it depends on the development stage. So this makes it very complex, because then it is a very much of a question of biology. If we have to go through to study the impacts on the marine food webs, then anything above this small animal level will be impacted. But the question is, but how much? And what we already saw from Lars's presentation, that okay, it's going to be, if a lot of scrubbers will be used for ships, then the coastlines and the archipelago areas, those are the ones where the contaminants will end up in sediments. But the bottom line that I actually circled with an ellipsoid here is that, okay, we have the science now. Now, if something needs to be done at the regulatory level, then this has to be taken to the IMO. But there has to be somebody who will spearhead this initiative. And it requires that there's a political will to do that. Okay, but this is my last slide. So basically, if you want to know more and you want to have access to all the papers and deliverables and reports and things like these, then you can find it from the website. But I will end up my slideshow, and then we have some time for discussions, if there is any questions. And again, I am unable to stop the sharing. So Nikki, would you stop the sharing? Thank you.
Oh, yep.
Okay, now we're back to WebEx. Thank you. So one thing to note is that I already mentioned to IVL that, okay, once the MEPC meeting is coming up, so it would be good to have our ecotox experts in MEPC 82. So that would be a way to make sure that, okay, whatever critique we get from the industry side concerning the topic of scrubbers, when they are providing feedback to our IMO documents, so then we can provide them with a timely answer, point by point, if there is any kind of criticism, for example, for the methodology or sampling or analysis or things like this. So it would be good to have that on site, so that we can provide a direct response. But I don't know what is the feeling from the Commission side? So I don't know if Mattia, if you have a feeling, where are we with the scrubber discussion at the EU level? So do you know about this?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the question. And I would say that the feeling at the EU level is about studying everything we have now available about data, the scientific data you cited, and then study a submission to IMO for the next MPC, a new one for further discussions about the wastewater discharge ban in general. So we are now studying all the data. We are studying what we have now, and then we are drafting a submission. I mean, I have to we have to study this at this moment, at this stage, and then I think that from now on, maybe in June, there will be some feedback from us about this, but we are very committed to the topic.
Okay, I'm very, very glad to hear that. So of course, what we have available is also available to you. So there is a lot of material that we can, what we already have, or what we can deliver. So it just depends that there is enough time for this EU coordination, so that everybody agrees that what should be done. Because that was the challenge that was that we faced about a half a year ago, was that okay? What we could do with the timeline that was given to us is that we can provide information documents, but there was no room or not enough time for EU coordinated action, whether something should be changed. So the IMO submissions that we made, both the PPR and the MEPC, so those were information papers.
Yes, we are already discussing internally everything.
Yeah.
And then studying a way to submit it very quickly. We are already discussing it.
Okay. So do you know if it's Rosa Antidormi who is preparing this, or is it somebody else from the member states?
I don't know, I can actually say, but we are internally discussing at the EU level with EMSA and DG Environment.
Yeah. Because from DG Environment side, so basically what we have done with these IMO submissions was that, okay, we had a discussion with Rosa Antidormi from DG Environment. So she was the one who was kind of advising us on how to proceed with these submissions. So looking after these procedural things, that things go right in a kind of a so the marching order would not be exceptional. So it would be something that is goes along the lines that were commonly agreed at the EU level, how things work. So Rosa was helping us in that sense.
Yes, and she's the focal point for this topic. Today here, I am just an observer, not the focal point of the entire discussion, but I can assure you that we are internally discussing it at EMSA and EU level.
Okay, that's good. So I noticed that there was something in the chat. So was it Ian? Yeah, Ian, would you raise these points live? Okay, so what we is basically saying that okay, here you are. So you can say it yourself, yeah. You are sitting in a very dark room with a bright light at the background. So okay, now it is much better. But you are still muted.
There's no audio.
Yeah, so basically what Ian typed in the chat was that the benefit that we have from this project is that whatever we do is published in peer-reviewed papers. So basically, I know that, for example, when people were preparing the greenhouse gas studies, then there was an emphasis that the methodology and the findings and these kind of things. So primarily, the study should rely on peer-reviewed literature. So in that sense, that is something that we have done. So we have made sure that whatever we report goes through this academic peer review. And that's actually something, for example, that is not normally done if you look at the recent submissions to from the NGOs. So basically, how they do things is that, okay, they write a report, they publish it on the website, but then it is not peer reviewed. Whereas what we do is that it goes through this review process, so that if there are any errors, they will be pointed out to us, and then we have a chance to revise. So that's a very good point. I don't get the second one. So basically, you're saying that lead was already banned. Okay, so it took a long time. Yeah. That is true. So basically, what Ian is saying that there are some examples from the past that where the changes on the regulatory side have taken as a considerable time. So what we have learned is that, okay, the methodology and the things that we have done, so we have not started from scratch. So basically, we have followed the similar kind of approach that we have already found working at the air side, and taking these lessons and then expanding our studies on the water side. So basically, this allows to move faster than waiting for a long time to actually come to a conclusion whether things are harmful or not. So I think this is the point that Ian, you wanted to make. But I should say that this water discussion is not a unique topic in that sense, because we see a similar kind of thing happening with underwater noise. So basically, that's another thing that is coming up very strong at the IMO. So basically, how to define it, how to measure it, how to manage it, and these kind of things. So it is also picking up momentum on the noise side. So discharges to the sea is not the only one that is benefiting from this experience with the air part. So do we have?
Maria has raised her hand.
Okay, I see. Yeah. Okay, Maria, go ahead.
Yes, I would just like to say that just to highlight the points also made by Ian here, that what we find is quite exceptional. I mean, finding effects at such low concentrations as we do, and we get from different labs with different organisms, we find similar results, is not very usual. So there's really, I have to raise some concern here that scrubber water is extremely toxic. Many of us have been working in ecotoxicological or biological fields for 30 years or so, or more, even some of us. So this is, we've tested different compounds and looked at different issues, and this is really pressing. So I want to convey that message, that this is, it's a very unnecessary pollution source, I would say, and there are strong grounds to ban it.
Well, at least from the scenarios that were presented, so basically it is pretty clear that if you move towards methanol and LNG, so then you remove the need to use any kind of scrubber. So that's for sure. But right now it seems that scrubbers are economically very attractive. So you can reclaim the cost of your investment in a very short time. So actually there was a couple of weeks ago, there was a study that was released from Emerge, came up in Nature Sustainability, that 95% of the scrubber installations, so the costs of those have been reclaimed within 5 years of the installation for 95% of the fleet. So that's an indication that, okay, the scrubbers are now the money-making machine in that sense. You already recovered the cost and now you are actually expanding your profits. But since there is no price tag on the effluent, so it is very unilateral in that sense. So the cost comes at the cost of environment. But that's a good point, Maria. So anything further on this? But what I can say from our side is that, okay, we will definitely keep Rosa informed, so that yeah, if she needs something from us, then we are ready to help. But I would like to say that, for example, for the future, so Emerge ends at the end of May, but we just have new toys to play with. So in that sense, it would be a natural extension of these efforts to do things in a larger scale. So if there is a need for this kind of study, then I'm sure that we can discuss the options for that. But at least from the technical point of view, what we can say that, okay, the tools are built in a way that gives us the opportunity to contribute. So in that sense, both on the science and from the policy point of view, it makes things very, very interesting. So I foresee that there will be a lot of very nice scientific papers coming out of this, but that's not the only output. So Vasilis, go ahead. You have your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to add that the more research you do, the more questions you raise, and it's not only applying this to global scale, but we actually always find more things that we can refine, more things that we can improve, and for us it has been a great adventure actually, and I think we should continue it.
Yeah, I'm sure, but one part of the process is that you stay curious, and the other part is that, okay, you learn how to ask better questions. But this applies to all research, I think. No, but that's something that we can definitely continue discussing. But how to proceed with the things that we already have. Now we can
Ian.
see and hear you, Ian. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
we can.
My sincere apologies. I think I somehow managed to switch off my microphone. And because I'm more used to chalk in a cave than WebEx, I failed to reset it. So I think, Jukka-Pekka, you guessed admirably what I was about to say. But the point I wanted to make perhaps more widely is that perhaps the biggest environmental criminal of all time was a guy called T.C. Midgley Jr. And T.C. Midgley Jr. Worked in the 1920s, and he did two things. He invented CFCs, which were put into air conditioning systems in cars initially, and he also was responsible for putting lead into petrol. Now, he put lead into petrol even though 50 of his research team got lead poisoning, and several of them died, and he himself almost died as a result of lead poisoning in 1929. And yet, industry still went ahead and put lead in petrol. And it took until 1989, 60 years later, and a massive amount of effort by the scientific community and the medical community to undo that. And those of you that were around in 1989, and there are one or two of us on the call, will remember the colossal amount of effort that the car and the fossil fuel industry put into blocking catalytic converters being put into cars, which effectively resulted in lead being banned. So I think it's really important here just to emphasize that we've put 5 years of work, more than 5 years of work, into the outputs from this project, that it was funded from taxpayers' money, that it's been done to the highest possible standards. It's gone through every peer review process and we've jumped every hoop. And, you know, I think it's actually, for us to have done this and to have generated the results we have done, for our results to be ignored actually requires industry to match what we've done in terms of international standards, transparency, putting results through peer review like we've done. If they cannot do that and demonstrate that we're wrong, then the default position should be that we are listened to. So I just want to make that point, that there's a long history of science evidence being blocked by industry, but we cannot afford to wait 60 years for the results of this project to be acted upon. And I think that's just what I wanted to say. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Ian. I think that was a good summary. Okay, go ahead, Mattia.
Okay, thank you so much. And I just wanted to add that, as I said, we are working with the Commission for the submission to the next PPR. And then additionally, I forgot that we are going to publish the second version of MTER, as you mentioned in your presentation, at the end of the year with the info of scrubbers that you provided us. So just to add this.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're working with Sami and Sergio on many things, and MTER is one of those. So that's a very good example. I like this synthesis report because it's an opportunity to draw these kind of findings that happen throughout the years into a single report, because I know that not everybody has the time to go through all the scientific papers. So this report serves this purpose of keeping people informed what has happened since the last release. So that's a very useful tool. But okay, we have had a wild ride for today. So unless you have additional points you wish to make, then I think we can conclude. Okay, I would like to thank all the speakers and everybody. So also Matteo joining us on this journey. We appreciate it a lot. So thank you for coming. So I'm sure that we'll keep you and Rosa also informed. So if something is needed from our side, then we are willing to help you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone, and until next time we see you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Right.